You are listening to Being, Episode 2, What the Fog Doesn't Show.
This is Walter Ames. In 4 months, he's going to be found dead beside his own car on the third levels of a parking structure in downtown Seattle. And the detective who finds him is going to spend 6 months and then 11 years and then the rest of his life failing to explain what happened to him. I already know exactly what happened to him. I'm going to tell you anyway, from the beginning, the way you tell someone about a chess game whose ending you already know. Not to spoil it. To show you the moves nobody else was watching closely enough to see. People think a chess game is decided by the move that wins it. It isn't. It's decided 6 or 7 moves earlier by the piece nobody thought to defend. Not the queen, not the king. Some small thing on the edge of the board that everyone assumed would still be there when they needed it. That is where games are actually won. In the assumption. In the thing left unguarded because it seemed too minor to matter. Most people play the board. I have always played the assumption. My name is Elliot Voss. I still sell insurance. I still drive the Civic. 3 years before a Tuesday in November in a town called Mill Haven, I'm a slightly younger version of the same unremarkable man, working a slightly smaller territory, already very good at the thing I'm good at. This is a different kind of story than the last one. This one starts with a game. Detective Marcus Tell gets the call at 6:40 in the morning. A parking structure downtown, level 3. A man found beside his own car by an early shift worker who noticed he hadn't moved in a while. Tell has been a detective for 11 years. He's 44 years old and good at his job in the specific way of a man who has decided ambition and competence are the same thing and has not yet been forced to learn otherwise. He stands over the body for a long time before he says anything. No forensics worth naming, no struggle, no camera angle that shows anything except a man walking to his car like any other Tuesday, and then, at some point between the elevator and the driver's door, simply not walking anymore. Tell crouches down. He looks at the man's face for longer than procedure requires. He will tell his partner later that something about it bothered him. He won't be able to say what. He's not a man who is often bothered by things he can't name, and this will irritate him for reasons that have nothing to do with the case. Walter Ames was 39 years old. He did other people's taxes for a living, carefully, at a small firm 2 blocks from where he was found, and he had done this long enough that he no longer thought of it as a job so much as a shape his days had settled into. He lived alone in a rented house with a chessboard set up permanently on the dining table. Mid-game, always mid-game, because Walter believed a chessboard put away was a chessboard you'd stop thinking about, and he never stopped thinking about his. He had a brother in Tacoma who called twice a year. He had, at some point, been married. Nobody at the firm knew the details, and Walter never offered them. There was simply a version of him that existed before, referenced occasionally, the way people reference weather from a country they used to live in. Every Tuesday night he played chess at the downtown library with 6 or 7 other people who did the same thing. He was, by a wide margin, the best player who showed up regularly. He had never once been anyone's first thought when they pictured a friend. He was, without complaint, extremely used to that. I found the chess club by accident, the way I find most things. I had an evening free in Seattle in a hotel room I didn't want to sit in, and the library was 2 blocks from where I was staying, and there was a hand-lettered sign taped to the community board. Chess Club, Tuesdays, all levels welcome. I am not a beginner. I have not lost a game of chess to anyone who mattered in longer than I can be bothered to calculate. But there's a particular pleasure in losing on purpose to the right person at the right moment in a way that looks like nothing except an honest mistake. It buys you something no win ever could. It buys you being underestimated. Walter beat me in 19 moves the first night. I made it look close. I made it look like it cost me something. It did not cost me anything. He looked, when it was over, the way certain people look when they've won something they didn't expect to win against someone they assumed would be difficult. Not smug, surprised, quietly, privately pleased in a way he was trying not to show and not quite managing. I told him it was the best game I'd played in years, that was, in its way, true. I came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, we talked over the board about nothing important. Openings, a variation he liked, whether the library's radiator was ever going to stop making that sound. He was careful with his words, in the way of a man who has learned that most people's attention is a limited resource, and he doesn't want to spend more of it than he's owed. He apologized once for talking too long about a position from a game he'd read about. I told him I could have listened for another hour. He looked at me the way Carol looked at me eventually, the way most of them do, like someone had finally sat down across from them and stayed. 6 weeks in, he invited me to his house to look at his board, the one that stayed set up. Mid-game, always mid-game. He made tea neither of us really wanted, and we sat at his dining table, and he walked me through a position he'd been stuck on for 11 days, moving the pieces slowly, narrating his own thinking out loud, in a way I don't think he did for anyone else, because there had been no one else, in a while, patient enough to be narrated to. I asked him what he thought made someone actually good at the game. Not clever. Good. He thought about it for a while. He said it wasn't about seeing further ahead than the other person. Plenty of people could do that. It was about not being afraid of the quiet part. The long stretch in the middle, where nothing dramatic is happening and most players get restless and force something, when the whole game is actually being won or lost in exactly the silence. I told him that was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years. He went quiet after that, the good kind of quiet, the kind that comes after saying something true and being heard saying it. We played most Tuesdays for 4 months. I let him win most of them, not obviously, carefully, the way you let a piece of good news arrive slowly enough that a person can actually feel it landing, instead of just registering that it happened. The last evening, he beat me in 41 moves, the longest game either of us had played, and when it ended, he sat back in his chair and exhaled in a way that had nothing to do with chess. He said he couldn't remember the last time an evening had gone that fast. He said it looking at the board, not at me, the way people say true things when they're a little bit afraid of how true they are. I told him neither could I. That was also, in its way, true. He walked me to the door. The porch light was out. He mentioned it, apologetic, said he kept meaning to fix it. And we stood for a moment in the half-dark while the fog came up off the water somewhere behind the houses and softened every edge of the street into something you couldn't quite be sure of. He said he'd see me Tuesday. I said I was looking forward to it already. I want to tell you what I felt standing there. Before I tell you what happened next, there is a specific weight to the last good moment before it stops being the last good moment, a kind of fullness, the feeling of a note held right at the top of its breath before it has to resolve one way or another. I had spent 4 months being patient. Patience has never been difficult for me, but underneath the patience, there's always a hunger that doesn't go away just because it is being managed well. And standing in that half dark with the fog rolling in and Walter's porch, light out, and his face still open, in the particular way a face is open right before someone says something they mean, I could feel that hunger arrive the way you feel weather changing before the first drop falls. I let myself want it, just for a moment. I have never seen the harm in wanting something honestly, as long as the wanting doesn't rush you. I said goodnight instead. I drove back to my hotel and did not look in the rearview mirror. I never look back at things. Not yet. Not that night. I still had one more Tuesday to spend, and I intended to spend all of it. I'm going to tell you something true. There's a version of me that is 11 years old, standing at the edge of a well behind my grandmother's property, holding my cousin, who is not yet 1 year old and does not yet know anything about the world, except that he's being held, and held gently, by someone bigger than him. It is a warm day. There are adults inside the house, their voices carrying faintly through an open window, arguing pleasantly about something to do with dinner. I remember the weight of him, lighter than I expected. I remember the sound he was making, not crying, something smaller than crying, the contented sound of an infant who trusts wherever he currently is. I remember looking down into the well. I do not remember deciding anything. That is the part I have never been able to explain to myself in the years since, in whatever private accounting I do of these things. There was no moment of decision that I can locate. There was simply the well and the weight in my arms. And then there was the weight gone from my arms, and a sound that stopped being an infant sound and became a different kind of sound entirely, briefly, before it stopped. I stood there afterward the way I stood in a backyard years before that, watching a window burn, still, unhurried, looking at something that had just happened as though it had happened to someone else, and I had simply been given the best seat from which to watch it. Everyone called it a terrible accident. I told the minimum necessary version. I have always told the minimum necessary version, not because I was protecting myself, because some part of me has always understood that the full version is not owed to anyone. It is mine. It has always been mine, the way a good position on a board belongs to the player who saw it first and said nothing while everyone else was still looking at some other piece entirely. The following Tuesday, Walter Ames did not show up to chess club. I want you to understand that I know exactly why, and I'm not going to tell you here. Some things belong later in this document, and some things do not belong in this document at all. What I will tell you is that the last thing Walter Ames felt before he stopped being able to feel anything was the particular clarity of a man who has just understood far too late exactly what 4 months of Tuesdays actually were. That instant is the only part of any of this I have ever wanted for its own sake, not what came after it, the instant itself. I'm not going to describe what came after it. Marcus. Tell works the Walter Ames case for 6 months before it goes cold on his desk officially, and considerably longer than that in whatever part of him keeps working after the paperwork says otherwise. There's a chessboard in the evidence photos, mid-game, permanently mid-game, and nobody on his team can tell him who Walter's regular opponent was, because Walter never wrote the name down anywhere, because Walter didn't think he needed to. He assumed, the way people assume about things too minor to matter, that Tuesdays would simply keep happening. Tell closes the case as unsolved. He makes lieutenant 2 years later, properly this time, paperwork included. He keeps a note in a drawer at home that isn't part of any official file. Just 3 words in his own handwriting from the morning he stood over Walter Ames, longer than procedure required. Someone he trusted. He doesn't know why he wrote it. He has never been able to prove it. It surfaces on nights he can't sleep, usually around 3, for reasons he has stopped trying to explain to his wife. I am 400 miles south of Seattle when the fog finally burns off the water that morning. I have an appointment at 11. A woman outside of town in Idaho has been meaning to update her policy since her husband passed, and her daughter has been asking her to just get it sorted, and I told her when I called to confirm that I understood completely, and that these things are easier to face with someone patient sitting across the table. She sounded relieved to hear it. The road south is long and mostly empty, and the mountains on either side of it do not know or care what direction I'm driving in, or why, or what waits at the end of it for someone else who has not yet met me. I find that indifference restful. I always have.